You're listening to Panthers on Tap. I'm Curtis Rauen, joined by Bryson Karbley. We're just two fans sharing our love for the game and Carolina Panthers football. So join us, crack open a cold one, some bubbly, a little wine, some scotch. We don't care, whatever makes you sleep better at night. Before we dive into the episode, a little self-promotion. Stop what you're doing. Go give us a follow on Twitter at Panthers on Tap. Join the discussion on our Facebook group. We have over 2,500 members. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcast. Just search Panthers on Tap. The season is over for the Carolina Panthers. They finished 2-15 on the year. Frank Reich is gone. Scott Fitterer now out the door. Bryson, we survived the season.
Yeah, I mean, it literally felt like a court sanction this year to be a Carolina Panthers fan. It was not a fun year to like the team in process blue, but we made it to the end, and we are looking forward to change and hopefully prosperity in the future.
Yes, they got to get it right this time. Well, bring them all in here. Unfortunately, we've really been accustomed to this coaching search around these parts lately. So we had to do it up big, just like last year. So we have JJ Hardy with us, Ricky Raines, and Kevin Avery joining us tonight on the Panthers on Tap podcast. Guys, it's good to see you, but I want to jump right into it right off the bat since we haven't gotten to talk about this really much at all since it happened. Big news. I believe it was Monday morning. I hopped in the shower and I came out and have a text from Bryson that Scott Fitterer is gone and a bunch of tweet notifications. And I'm like, oh, of course it happens when I leave. But let's get into it. Bryson, let's start with you. I know we have talked for seems like months now about Scott Fitterer and his failures. Relieved at all about this move?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have mixed feelings. Obviously, the work that Scott Fitterer has done in Carolina has not been good, to put lightly. He's dealt with a lot through his time here in Carolina, with Tepper being involved and Matt Rule, early on into his tenure here. And I guess where my mixed feelings comes from is the relationship that he's kind of cultivated with the fans, specifically with, us going to training camp or on the sidelines before games and kind of always being just like a genuine nice guy. And I think that's his reputation around the league as well. Unfortunately, he just wasn't very good at his job. He's made some key mistakes in Carolina that led to this season. And unfortunately, it was just time to sever ties and move on. But that part makes me sad just because, I never like to see anybody lose their job, much less somebody that, is genuinely a nice person. So it sucks for him and his family, but I know he'll probably bounce back, fall on his feet. And looks like Seattle's got some openings probably coming available up there. So he might return home back to Seattle and hopefully he continues to progress in the NFL from here on out. But yeah, I mean, it's what I wanted ultimately. I think it's time for change in Carolina, completely top to bottom change, from the front office to the scouts to the coaches. It's time. We all know Carolina hasn't drafted well in a lot of years, and it's time to start hitting on some of these late round picks to get back into relevancy in the NFC South and NFC overall. So yeah, I mean, I think he just wore out his welcome, unfortunately, and I think they made the right decision, and I'm just hoping that they make the right one with the new hire.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what you said. He was very gracious with fans, always willing to come over, take a picture, but when it came to his job, he could not get it done, and that was the problem. Let's go to Kevin. Kevin, I want to ask you something a little bit different. What do you think Scott Fitterer's biggest mistake was in his 3 years here?
Well, as someone that defended Scott Fitterer, I always gave him a pass because under former coach Matt Rule, who had the final say on personnel, I kind of felt like Scott Fitterer was the middleman. Like, he just kind of had to go along and kind of put together whatever Rule wanted. That's just my speculation. But I said I was going to judge him solely off of 2023. For me, the biggest mistake that Scott Fitterer made in my opinion, was the fact that since he passed up 2 first-round picks and a third-round pick for Brian Burns in 2022, that he failed to um, give him the contract extension that he deserves. And I just felt like, that was the biggest of his mistakes. He had a few other ones that were pretty significant, but for me, my own personal biggest beef with him was the stalled out, delayed, negotiation tactics with Brian Burns' extension. That pretty much um, is the albatross for me about Scott Fitterer. It just really shows that someone can do their job, be good in the community, and get lowballed or not be taken care of. And I'm sure that guys like Derek Brown that's coming up, they're going to be looking at like, okay, you did Burns like this. What about me? So I just think it just put a bad odor and a bad taste in the around the Panthers players in the locker room the way Fitterer handled Brian Burns.
JJ, let's go to you. What would you say was Fitterer's biggest downfall?
I think Fitterer's biggest downfall was the fact that he never stood up for himself. If he ever had differing opinions of Matt Rule's decisions or Dave Tepper's decisions, from day one with him coming in, let's go back to the Sam Darnold trade. I don't know where he actually was with the Sam Darnold evaluation, but everybody around the league pretty much had consensus on who Sam Darnold was. So whenever Rule went to Tepper, Rule came to him. If he's actually worth his salt as an evaluator, I think if he disagreed, and I'm not saying that he did, but if he disagreed with that move or any of the subsequent moves that followed that bad QB move, i.e., trading up to get Matt Corral for whatever reason, trading assets to get Baker, and I know I like the Baker move, but whatever the situation was, I just felt like if he was in disagreement but didn't stand up and say, no, I don't want to do that, let's reconsider, let's do something different, I felt like that was his biggest weakness as a GM. I think, and I said this from day one, I think GMs should always stick to their guns, and in terms of making personnel moves. And if you're not a GM who can stand up and at least sway the opinion of the room, then I don't think you're worth your salt. And him being what I at least perceived to be a yes man, to me was ultimately his demise. So to me, his biggest downfall was not having a backbone to do his own thing, and he was just a guy that went along with other decision makers in the building.
Ricky, what about you? You can really answer any one of the questions I posed to Kevin or JJ, and just initial thoughts on the move.
No, I mean, I think that they covered a lot of that. And there's a sentiment that I think rings true throughout all of what we're saying, and it's the messaging that he was personally responsible for giving about where we were as far as dropping a quarterback in, and the ultimate success about where we were supposed to be as a team. The not standing up for yourself, that comes back around too, where if you're against some of these critical decisions, you're going to be held accountable by silence as much as you will by words, right? So if you don't say anything and you don't make it known what your preference was, and I think this is what JJ is speaking to, is that if we don't know where you stand on something, you're going to be aligned with the result of that action. And what this front office did is they preached collaboration, and they preached that they were together on these things. So we have to judge them together. And the messaging from day one from them just didn't make a ton of sense with the actions that they were doing on the field and behind the scenes. So I think that Fitterer had the intentions of building a winner. I don't think that he was lying. I think he thought we were close, but either he thought very highly of himself to the point where it was detrimental, and he thought he was better than he was at what he was doing, and that he was smarter than everybody else, or he wasn't as smart as he wanted everyone to believe and just wasn't competent at the position.
I'll open this up to anyone if you can remember, because there's a lot of them. Worst draft pick of Scott Fitterer's general manager days. Anyone can have the floor on that. What do you think the worst pick he made?
Thomas Fletcher.
I figure that would be it.
Thomas Fletcher's a great one. I'll say DJ Johnson just because of the context of it about trading up and moving up and grabbing a guy that had no business being drafted at where he was with the age and everything else that comes into it, not even playing, and you sacrificed a pick that could have helped out your franchise rookie quarterback.
Yeah, I'll throw Matt Corral in there too, I think.
Yeah.
With him being out of the league.
Yeah.
I'll throw the starting left tackle for the Carolina Panthers in there, Ken McLaurin at number 6 overall in there as well.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely arguable.
Kevin, worst pick of the Fitterer era?
Because I took my favorites, I'm gonna go against my own grain a little bit here. I'm gonna say passing up. I'm gonna say drafting J.C. Horn and passing up on a Micah Parsons.
Yeah, those are all good ones.
That's a sore subject for me.
Well, guys, I want to bring this up because we talked about this, kind of switching gears a little bit, and then we'll get into everything else with the coaching and the candidates so far. But I wanted to bring this up. Sorry, Ricky, we did not have you on the show. I think it was the week before the season. But we had brought up we did some predictions, and I just wanted to put them out there because I thought it'd be fun just to look at them. We did predictions.
You're a sick bastard. You're
That's dirty. That's so dirty.
So we did. I just took predictions from Bryce Young stats because I thought we all were way off, clearly. But I just want to share my screen with you guys just to show you. So it was Bryson, me, JJ, and Kevin. We predicted what his stats were. I only pulled the passing stats. I'll mention the rushing as well. I have them in mind, but this is what we had for predictions for good old Bryce Young. And as you can see in the blue box, that's what Bryce Young's stats were actually. So way less yards. We're pulling receipts tonight. No, but yeah, it was I just thought it'd be funny just to kind of take a look at it. I think obviously all of us thought this season would go way differently than it did. Bryson actually was pretty spot on the rushing yards. I think you had 250. Bryce Young had 253 rushing. I think you were the closest, but yeah, no rushing touchdowns. I think we all had a couple. So, but just across the board, just your guys' reactions to Bryce Young's season as a whole. I guess we'll start with Ricky on this one.
Yeah, that's crazy because if I had been on this episode, you would have seen my prediction was 2,900 passing yards, 12 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, just really, really close to accurate. No, I'm lying through my teeth, man. I would have been right there in that 3,500 range with you, Curtis. One thing that does come to mind, though, is if you look at those interceptions, right, of all of your predictions. I think that kind of alludes to the fact that you thought that he would go through his rookie struggles. He was going to make some mistakes. He was going to get confused. He was going to make some throws that maybe he shouldn't, or maybe he was like testing his abilities in the pros as opposed to the college game. And his finishing with 10, I think, is a testament to him, too, to be completely honest. And there's not a whole lot to write home about with that rookie season from a production standpoint. But, man, all that pressure in his face and all of that scrambling and evading and trying to figure out against already playing against, a pretty loaded deck against him. I think 10 interceptions is worth giving him a pat on the back for, man, would be my takeaway.
Bryson?
Yeah, I'm a strong proponent of Bryce cannot really be judged off of this season. I think that he's battled through a lot of adversity in regards to having one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL, the worst skill position group surrounding him, and then obviously a head coaching change throughout at the middle of the season. So yeah, I mean, he's obviously it wasn't as good as we wanted, year one to be, or what we expected year one to be from Bryce Young. And, the guy in Houston playing the way he was, led to a lot of stuff that was said that I don't think is going to be true next year going into year 3. But I'm glad that Bryce made it out healthy. I think that he answered one of his major questions I think everyone had was, his size, if he's going to be able to stay healthy throughout an NFL season. And he was sacked 60 times and, played all but one game. So I thought that was very impressive. He obviously took his lumps and had his good games, had his bad games. But I think once he gets into a system and an offense that, works and caters to him, I think he's going to excel. And these stats, JJ and Kevin's stats that we got on the board here, I think are going to be more realistic than what we have this year.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up, well, not really glad, but that you mentioned the Texans game. Man, that was tough to watch. Like, CJ Stroud in Houston is lighting it up, man. He had a special year. JJ, just overall thoughts on Bryce Young this year?
Well, first of all, I like to say that my predictions were based on CJ Stroud. See, I was confused. See, if that was CJ Stroud's numbers, then I'm actually pretty accurate here. But Bryce, to me, I would say this, my concern started in the preseason. I don't know when we shot the episode where we talked about predictions, but my hope during the preseason was that what we were seeing from the few series he played was that we were getting this vanilla offense, and that when the season started, we would see more of the Sean McVay stuff where Thomas Brown came from. I think the most disappointing part of his performance overall wasn't necessarily anything that he did on the field. It was more so how he was used. I never felt, probably until, just a few instances in some games, where we saw flashes, I just never felt like the offense that they put him in maximized his skill set. I wanted to see him in that McVay style offense where there was a lot of pre-snap motion, a lot of things that would give him easy, quick reads. I never expected him to be some bomber, where he threw a lot of deep balls and connected deep a lot. I thought he would have some program shots that he could take. And we did see some of that early. He didn't connect on enough of them, in my opinion. But I wanted to see him just basically like dice teams up. And although, again, he did do that in instances, we just didn't see it consistently enough. But I think a lot of that was a product of the position his coaches put him in, a lack of preparation on their part, or some incohesion within the coach's room. The QB coach, the OC, the head coach, when Frank Wright was there. I just don't think they were ever on the same sheet of music. And that always manifested on the field. And the only thing that I could kind of look at his game and say that I would like to see him improve on, I would like to see him be quicker in his drop, to get to his spot quicker, because I think there was a lot of plays where he would get to the top of his drop and where you would normally see quarterbacks release the ball, because somebody should be coming open at that point. Bryce just kind of held on to it, and maybe it was because somebody wasn't open. We saw that a lot. But I just want to see something like more rhythm out of him. Some of the deep balls, I want to see him become a little bit more accurate, just get back into the lab, figure that out, how to be more accurate deep. And then, just clean up a lot of the turnovers that he did have. I mean, the 10 interceptions weren't a lot, but, everybody on this call who watched him play, there were about 3 or 4 of them where it's like, man, why did you throw that? What was the purpose of, how did you get picked off at the line of scrimmage twice? You know what I'm saying? The screen pass to Hutchins. What's the guy's name in Detroit? I can't think of his name. He's a stud, but I can't think of his name.
Hutchinson?
Yeah, Hutchinson.
You had it.
Yeah. So that interception, the interception to Moore, I think it was Moore out of Indy, the pick six. Just a couple of interceptions they threw. It was like, that won't happen your whole career. So
while you're on that point, don't mean to cut you off. And I listened back to this episode to get these numbers, and I thought it was ironic because most of us, I think, majority of us said we didn't think Bryce Young would make the same mistake twice.
Yeah.
And we saw in Atlanta, he made the
Yeah.
same mistake twice. First
Yeah.
game of the season. We saw in, I think, Cincinnati, he made the same mistake twice this year. Or there was another game where he had 2 picks and he threw it to the same guy, and it very similar. So something that I think all of us didn't see that at Alabama and didn't expect to happen here in Carolina. But go ahead. Sorry.
No, and I mean, I'll just end it right there. Like, to me, that was week 1 against Atlanta. To see him, throw the ball to the same spot and basically the same throw get intercepted twice by the same guy, that's when I was like, whoa, I didn't expect that, especially in week 1, because I know I was one of the main ones who said I didn't expect him to make the same mistake twice. Bryce was sold as this like mental savant at the QB position. And so we had every reason from watching him at Alabama and from what, the staff was telling us in the preseason, where, you just didn't think that he would make some of the mental miscues that he made. But all in all, when you look at the totality of his numbers, 10 interceptions, that wasn't bad. I think he needs to get, a little bit more firm with his grip on the ball when he does get, when he's in the pocket and gets sacked or he's trying to scramble. These guys are big and strong. You got to protect the ball. You got to wrap it up, and put 2 hands on it because he lost a few fumbles too. So anyway, it's behind us now. I'm just hoping that they get the right type of coaches to help him continue to grow. I think he got the goods to be a good quarterback. It's just hard, like you said, or whoever said it earlier. It's just, when you compare him to the option that's doing so well right now, I think that's a lot of the reason many people are frustrated, because everybody knows that guy could have been here. But again, that too is, in the past now. We just got to hope that Bryce can continue to get better, because it doesn't matter how good CJ Stroud is. Bryce Young is still good enough to be a franchise quarterback, in my opinion, if he gets the right stuff around him.
Kevin, you were pretty optimistic first year, 28 touchdowns, 7 picks. Thoughts on Bryce Young this year?
Yeah, as far as my overall thoughts of Bryce Young, I would give him, if it was a grade, I would give him a C+, mostly because so much was said about his size. Can he handle NFL hits? The fact that he was the most pressured quarterback in the NFL, I think I saw on Twitter, he had a combined 232 forms of quarterback pressure. That means quarterback sacks, hits, and hurries. I mean, when you think of, so much been made about his size, the fact that he was able to survive that, and I think he only missed 1 game. That was week 3 at Seattle with the sprained ankle. And, and all these other quarterbacks that had the prototypical build missed way more time in him, particularly like Anthony Richardson, CJ Stroud, I think, missed some as well. So, I'm glad that little narrative can kind of be put to rest as far as that goes. Now, as far as the final numbers, did my own little bit of digging here. Those 11 interceptions, 4 of them came off of fingertips of Panther players into the hands of other defenders. And there were at least 6 drop touchdowns in the end zone as well. So, to me, and I got no problems admitting I do support and I go hard for Bryce, but I have no problems critiquing him when he doesn't play well. He had several, like, what the hell are you doing, Bryce moments this year, but you expect that as a rookie. My thoughts was the fact that this playbook was supposed to have been a mixture of Sean McVay's 11 personnel motion, pre-snap motion offense, along with Frank Wright's triangle design offense, and using a lot of 21, 22 personnel like he did in Indianapolis. Unless I missed it because I wear glasses, I don't think we even used the fullback once this year in any of our formations. mean, we didn't even see Cade Mays back there, who had success, being a blocking back for us, under the Steve Wilkes era, after Matt Rule was fired. So for me, I just feel like that what was said today by Hayden Hurst, that there was too many people in Bryce Young's ear. I think a lot of that hampered his ability to, I guess, perform to the levels that a lot of us had. So I'm with Bryson here. I'm not really judging Bryce Young, for what happened this year. Don't get me wrong; he's accountable for his mistakes. But and with another coaching change come in, I mean, those expectations immediately get high again. I mean, is it too far to ask that his third year, 2025, be when he's finally judged? I mean, you got to think about it. We're a cluster. You know what? I gotta monitor my language because I'm driving. But whoever we get, is not going to make it a immediate turnaround. Yes, I know everybody saw Houston made an immediate turnaround, but it's just hard to see or feel confident, especially with us not knowing who the head coach, who the GM is going to be, and of course, pending free agency and draft picks, and are we going to resign our own players? Like, so many unknown variables. So it's hard for me in early January to feel optimistic. But wrap it up with Bryce, I just think that I think he showed enough flashes. I think the fact that he was number one as far as the most accurate passer when receivers got separation in the NFL, and the fact that we were dead last in separation, I think at 1.2 yards, I think that just shows that, when we get this man the tools he need to work with, he's going to cook for us.
Yeah, and I'm just reiterating much what you guys said, but I think, Bryce Young in his first year was a product of his environment, 100%. Offensive line was worse than we thought. Wide receivers were terrible outside of Adam Thielen. And, he struggled with that. I think the biggest thing for next year is consistency for Bryce Young. You never saw him string together a couple games in a row where he was, performing at a high level, kind of like what we saw in Green Bay. So I think that's his biggest thing. JJ mentioned the footwork. He's definitely got to hold on to the ball a little bit better. I'm sure that will be emphasis this offseason, work on that slide a little bit too. But I thought he, at times he showed real promise and throws. You're like, holy shit, not every guy can make this kind of throw. So I think there is promise there, and there's nuggets here and there throughout the season that gives you hope for a franchise quarterback. But let's get into the coaching and GM cycle here, because this is going to take up much of the show anyway. So let me share my screen. I put together the list as of like 7 o'clock tonight. Hopefully I did not miss anyone in this list. But here it is. These are the interview requests that have been put in. So it's I want to say it's 12 head coach candidates. That's including Ejiro Evero and Chris Tabor, who's obviously in the building already. And then it looks like, if I'm counting this right, 10 general manager requests, including Dan Morgan, who is right now the assistant general manager with the Panthers. I did not include, if you're confused, the guy from Dallas, because it sounds like there was never a formal request put in. I know Albert Breer had posted that it was put in, and then Mike Kay and Joe Person both said that that request was never sent. So I don't have his name up here, but this is the list. I don't know where you guys want to start. Maybe we start with Dan Morgan, because I feel like a lot of us probably have an opinion on his involvement in this altogether, and if he should even be considered, and if Carolina should just clean house all across the board, get rid of Samir Suleiman, get rid of Dan Morgan. So maybe let's just start with Dan Morgan, and then we'll get into your guys' like top guys and stuff like that. But just your thoughts on Dan Morgan's involvement, and are you concerned we're just getting Scott Fitterer 2.0? Let's start with Ricky, since I haven't heard from you in a bit.
Yeah, look, my thing with Dan Morgan, man, I keep this really brief because it's pretty clear for me. I don't see any benefit to keeping him around in any capacity. That's just my personal opinion. It is difficult, I understand, for us on the outside to lay responsibility on individual moves and statements and ideas and all of that goes into his job responsibilities. But his job responsibility was under the position of assistant general manager, right? That's a pretty high level front office job in an NFL building. I think that he should be held accountable the same manner that his general manager was held accountable. And his general manager was just fired from his job Monday morning, immediately after one of the worst professional seasons of football. So I struggle really hard with anyone that says we don't know what he was and wasn't responsible for. I see a 2-15 football team that was incompetent from the top down, that had no plan, whether it was short term or long term. I'm good on that, man. I think you pressure wash his office and get the stench all the way out. Get the stench out with everybody, man. Like we talk about Samir Suleiman. By all accounts, man, he's really smart with the salary cap stuff, right? You look at those general manager names right there, they're heavy on the analytics, they're heavy on the salary cap, they're heavy on contract negotiations. So why would you keep Samir if that's the route that you're going? And I know the theory about we keep Dan Morgan and we bring in one of those cap guys. I don't see that being beneficial, man. I think you gotta clean house. I don't want, if you have cancer and you have 6 tumors, right? They don't go in and remove the worst 3 and say we're going to take our chance with the remaining 3. Like we'll just see what happens, right? Those weren't as big, those weren't as obvious. They might go away, or they might fester and they might grow to just as big as those other problems. Dan Morgan was aligned with Scott Fitterer in Seattle, right? Like they were there at the same time. So whatever you would want to put on his plate for good there, you can put on Scott Fitterer's plate, and we all wanted him gone. His time in Buffalo, everyone will say he built a really good team around Josh Allen as a rookie. He was the pro personnel, right? He was the director of pro personnel. So he did a lot more with the free agent acquisitions and the contracts and allocation of resources to professionals that were already in professional football, not just NFL, but other leagues and stuff. Their greatest signing under Dan Morgan, free agent wise, probably Cole Beasley. He's fine, right? He's a good ball player. There was a couple of offensive line signings that were good, but then you point to Carolina and everyone says, what about Nick Thurman? What about ISM? I like those guys, man, and they're good finds. Do they start on any other NFL team next week? Like, do they start on any playoff NFL team? Because if the answer is no, and that they barely make our roster, and our roster was one of the worst in the NFL, then what are we hanging our hat on here with Dan Morgan? Like, I just don't see it. So I'm cool with that, and I'm good on moving along.
Yeah, and if anyone's listening to us, I mean, we've talked about Dan Morgan and Scott Fitterer have been attached at the hip ever since Dan Morgan came here. Like, they're inseparable. And love Dan Morgan to death. I mean, took pictures of the guy, dapped him up at this last game, to be honest with you. But I've got a great
personal story about Dan Morgan in the Uptown Cabaret. We could talk about that after the episode tonight. But from any kind of front office capacity, I mean, it's not my cup of tea.
JJ, thoughts? I know you have a lot of thoughts about Dan Morgan.
Well, I'm glad that Ricky went first because he got a lot of my thoughts out. And so all I would say is the same thing. I mean, I won't take a lot of time with Dan Morgan just because I think he's a little more popular here than he would be anywhere else because of his history with the team. And I respect that. You know, he was a dog, you know, when he was here as a player. And so here in Carolina, we're very nostalgic about the guys who played here before and that played well here especially. And so, you know, whenever one of those guys want to stay in Charlotte, want to be part of the Panthers, they understand, keep pounding, we cling to them. I just think Dan Morgan, the player, isn't the same as Dan Morgan, the personnel guy. And I know that around the league, I've been seeing the reports about how he is perceived to be, you know, a rising star or a superstar. I think Dan Orlovsky or somebody like that tweeted it out. But he can be that, but still not be good for Carolina. And I think the fans need to understand just because he's, you know, a rising star in that way like you said, Ricky, I think when you have failure at the level that we've experienced failure during his tenure here, if he was that much of a star, why didn't he do anything to affect winning any more than he did? Because even if he sat back and had different ideas of who they should draft, who they should sign, and he didn't do anything to sway Scott Fitterer, his buddy, to go that route, he just sat back and watched Scott Fitterer, run into a brick wall time and time again, then I put the blame on him too. You can't blame Scott for everything that we have criticized Scott Fitterer about, and then alleviate him of the same thing. So yeah, I'm with Ricky on that. I like the fact that he was a former Panther, but beyond that, I don't see enough results from his time here to say, oh yeah, he should be one of the top candidates. Let him go and be great somewhere else, but clean shop, like you said, power wash the office completely.
Can I ask JJ a question? Because I loved what he was saying about being like an ascending star, right? At that position as far as a candidate. He had one job interview last cycle for the Steelers GM job, right? For the opening.
Yeah.
How many requests has he received so far this year with the openings?
I loved when you tweeted that earlier. I was like, that is.
He's had one request.
Yeah,
and it's Carolina's. And when's the last time that you saw a ascending star at their position go from in small demand the year prior to non-existent demand the next year, but they're still thought of as an ascending star? Like, you would at least want to have somebody talk to him on your team if he's ascending, right? No one even wants to talk to him.
You would want, like, it's kind of like when you're young and and you're in school or whatever, and you see the girl that you think is kind of cute.
Oh boy, here we go.
I mean, it could be the other way around. I'm equal opportunity, but so you're a girl and you like the guy, like whatever it is. But a lot of times you gauge how pretty she is or how handsome he is by how much other people want them, right?
Yeah.
And so when it comes to football, a lot of times you gauge how coveted a person is by how much the other teams want them. And if nobody's calling for the guy that you think is the guy, then maybe they might not be the guy. And honestly, what I see the whole Dan Morgan hype internally, is about is all about Tepper and his comfortability. It's like a crutch.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I can make the PR move and get rid of Scott Fitterer, but I can keep the same brain trust and the same confidant close to me by keeping Dan Morgan. And so in order for me to think that Dave Tepper has truly matured and learned from his past mistakes, I want to see him completely remove everybody that was associated with that front office and start brand new and develop trust with new people who's willing to tell him the truth completely. And I think Dan Morgan would continue to enable him and be an agent for him to try to sway opinion of a new GM or whoever that comes in and say, hey, look, Dave Tepper's not involved, but at the same time, Dan Morgan is the one meeting with them and trying to get them to see it Dave Tepper's way in secret. And so I want no parts of that.
Yeah, it just seems like just half-ass measures, and that's been that way literally since Tepper has taken over this team. Keep Marty Hurney, then fire Marty Hurney, and then hire Scott Fitterer after Matt Rule was hired, and just these half measures across the board. And it's just a spillover of the previous regime that continues to keep going on and on and on. Bryson, thoughts on Dan Morgan?
Yeah, I mean, I am a big Dan Morgan fan. He's one of my favorite Panthers of all time. I got his jersey hanging in my closet. But I think much like with Scott Fitterer, his time in Carolina has run out. And I think that a clean slate, top to bottom, like we talked about earlier, front office, scouts, coaching staff, maybe except for Ejiro Evero, is what's needed in Carolina. And no more yes men. We need somebody that's going to be able to tell the owner no and make correct decisions. A lot of the guys that we see on the list right here, potential general manager candidates, have ties to drafting good players in their organization. Like they were instrumental in drafting XYZ. I don't know what you can say about Dan Morgan and what he's been instrumental in drafting in Carolina that's been successful. So I think that he can be good somewhere else maybe. I think that he's got what it takes potentially, but I think his time in Carolina has run out, and it's time to, like I say, start fresh, top to bottom.
And some breaking news that I just got in. Jordan Schultz just reported the Panthers are interviewing, ironically, Samir Suleiman for their GM position, according to the Panthers website. He just posted that on X like a minute ago. So we just talked about him. They continue.
That would be the worst hire. I would rather have Dan Morgan. That would be the worst hire for GM.
See, so Samir they've made it known that he was doing more than just the salary cap stuff that he had started here. He's been involved in scouting. He's gone to some of these college pro days with the quarterbacks last year.
Well, Will Kunkel talked to him, and he had like a full-on fledged conversation about it too.
Oh, did he? I didn't see that. I didn't catch that one.
He had like an
the reporting
8-minute like interview with him about how he's kind of his role has grown within the organization. But go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm not going to say much about it. I think it's great that he wants to expand and open into different areas. I don't think that we need to be the landing spot for all of these people to experiment and find their footing as first-time candidates for these jobs. Like I just think that we are setting ourselves up for failure if we don't remove the failure from the building. Like, how do you get better if you continue to use these same pieces to try to make a different puzzle? You can't just make the pieces be something that they're not. These pieces aren't ready to go together, man. Like, it's pretty cut and dry. And I hope that this Samir thing is more of a, all due respect, we're going to go ahead and give you an opportunity here, let you plead your case, kind of like a formality, and appreciate your time. Maybe it's just a longer handshake than normal or something.
Well, and that could be it, and that could be it with the coach interviews as well. But the thing that I just find interesting is you see over and over again this Dan Morgan narrative is being pushed by Joe Person, a very highly respected reporter that a lot of us lean on for information, and he has been pushing that the last couple of weeks that Dan Morgan could stick around here. So just sort of out there. Kevin, let's get to you. We haven't heard from you. Dan Morgan, thoughts on him, his interview, and possibility of staying with the organization?
For me, I'm taking a position where I'm comfortable either way. If he goes, fine. I got reasons why. If he stays, I would be cool with it as well. Reason being, I'm all about a purge. I've said that on multiple tweets throughout the years. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes you got to scorch the earth and start all over. I'm definitely firm believe that, but also, realize that sometimes, and it's fan speculation because we can try to connect dots all we want. Unless you're in that building or know someone inside that building, we really can only guess what we think, who has ties and who did what. Who's to say that Dan Morgan didn't suggest one of the players that panned out better, and Scott Fitterer looked at it and just like, oh, that's cute, but you're the assistant pimp. I'm the number one pimp, so I'm gonna go with the guy that I want. You know what I'm saying? Like, it may sound far fetched, but again, we just don't know. So as fans, one of the fun things about this is especially with social media, is that we can speculate. For me, I know y'all gave reasons why Dan Morgan should let go. So let me just give you some of the things that I've thought about as far as if he stays, why that may be a good thing. Number one, all of us have said in a variety of different ways that the culture of the Carolina Panthers has been destroyed. David Tepper replaced the Panthers culture with analytics. From removing keep pounding on the field to He basically tried to think that running a hedge fund is the way to run an NFL franchise, and he's kind of having to walk back and realize that, oh, no, this might not be the way to go. For me, I think a guy like Dan Morgan would be someone that could help be a part of that culture to establish, the Panthers culture back. He knows he played his heart out, literally left his brains out for this franchise. Not to pick on his concussions, but I'm just saying, a guy that suffered multiple concussions because he played so hard with us. Now, I'm not saying to keep him around for, quote, a feel-good story because he used to play with us. I'm not saying that at all, but you guys were talking about why he haven't gotten any, requests if he's in a rising star. Let me ask you this. Who was the last executive hired from a consistent losing franchise such as the Panthers that went on to become an executive that turned it around with another team? I mean, if anybody can think of someone off bat, hey, feel free to let me know, because I couldn't think of any as I was listening to you guys talk about, the part about why nobody else has reached out to speak to him. I mean, when a franchise is 2-15, you're not really looking at who's there that you could think could help make your team be a lot better when we were literally the worst team in the league. So I just think, like I said, Dan Morgan, just to put it out there, could be a victim of circumstances as well. Now, am I saying he's completely flawless? No, I'm not saying that at all. He's probably got his fingerprints there. But and y'all know how it works, stuff slowly gets leaked out during the off season about who had roles and what, this, that, and the third. I'm just saying that, Dan Morgan staying around may not be a bad thing either. It just depends on, on what capacity or whatever the place, because we need somebody, to stay that's going to be in the front office that can remind them of what the culture keep pounding and what all that entails, that draws the players and what this community rallies behind. So I just think that if he goes, I won't cry. I won't, lose no sleep over it. But if he stays, I won't be mad that he stays either. So that's just where my position is and the reasons why.
All right, let's stick to GM here for a minute. And Ricky, you brought this up with a lot of these guys having an analytical background. And I just think it's interesting to note. You made me think of this. It always seems David Tepper does the complete opposite what he did the year prior. So he hires Matt Rule, young CEO type head coach, coming from college. It doesn't work out. So then he goes the complete opposite way and goes Frank Reich, veteran coach, been in the league forever. And then now he's looking to bounce back and go a young offensive minded instead of the old veteran type retread on offense. And then with general manager, he went with, Scott Fitterer, a scout at Seattle, worked his way up there. And now he's going the total opposite way of let's go analytical GM type. I don't know if anyone else has picked up on that, but I feel like he just bounces back and forth, complete opposite of the whatever he hired before. Totally discounting any of the other good scouts other than at the time he thought Scott Fitterer. So I just thought that was interesting to bring up. But on the general manager list here, I know not everyone is listed here, and I know there's a couple, and JJ will probably mention this soon, but Adam Peters not on this list yet from this requested 10 candidates. But just your guys' thoughts on the general managers. Who do you like as a general manager off this list, or anyone outside of there? I guess we'll start with JJ.
I mean, you already stole my thunder about Adam Peters, but that would have been the same answer I would have gave you last year when I was hoping Scott Fitterer would be fired. I had this answer back in 2021. Adam Peters has always been my number one GM candidate whenever the GM position is being discussed, because, and I'll just be transparent. Everybody on here, well, at least I know Bryce and you, Curtis, I grew up a 49ers fan. I gave 100% of my support over to Carolina fully in like 2018. I had already researched Adam Peters because he was already hired by the San Francisco in 2017. And so as they started ascending and everybody started giving John Lynch credit for building that team, I knew that it was Adam Peters who was building that team, and he just wasn't getting the credit. So in 2021, when we first had the GM opening, Adam Peters was my number one. I told everybody on Twitter, I told anybody who asked me, it's Adam Peters, because he's the guy who's actually doing the scouting and getting those late round gems that everybody seems to love today, and making those big personnel moves, getting guys like Christian McCaffrey via trade. Like, it's Adam Peters who I think is behind all of that, and John Lynch is getting all the credit. So if you admire teams that are built like San Francisco and you want that type of roster here in Carolina, then you go get the guy who you can see evidence of building that type of roster. And so Adam Peters is that guy to identify talent. And everybody's like, well, he wasn't that good when he first went to San Francisco. That's because Denver had been sorry for like a year or so prior to that. But he was also there when they built that Super Bowl team that beat Carolina in 2016 from the 2015 season. So anyway, and I think he originally got his start in New England. So he's been around winning for a long time. So I would want him first. But that's something that everybody who follows me know. From this list, I think the more I see these analytical types, these cap specialist types, the more I get turned off. Like, for example, the Kansas City guy, Brant Tillis, he wasn't the guy I was looking for from Kansas City. I think I was looking for a guy named Borgonzi or something.
Borgonzi, yep.
Borgonzi, baby.
Yeah, I wanted Borgonzi because when I researched the candidates out there, from everything that had been written about candidates, it was Borgonzi who was the person who's doing the scouting and the player and talent evaluation. And so
to cut you off quick, go watch Peter Schrager talking about Borgonzi. I think it was like 2 years ago on Good Morning Football, and his role he had with Kansas City. It's a great little bit, but go ahead.
No. And that's, that's the point I'm getting at, is because when I watched Kansas City, especially last year when they won the Super Bowl this past season.
Mm-hmm.
It was their roster that had like all these young guys starting in their secondary. You had young guys in the second level playing linebacker. You got guys like Karlaftis, who's getting like, a lot of production. And so like, you talk about their stars, but like they have a roster littered with young guys who were basically like day 2 and day 3 guys who are starting at a high level. And Carolina never has that. So it was Borgonzi who I wanted from Kansas City. And so when I saw Brant Tillis, I was like, okay, what they doing going for that guy? I want Borgonzi, but I was like, okay, whatever. He's coming from Kansas City, so I'm going to accept it. And then name after name was the same type of guy. So now that I see this list, if I'm just focused on the list and the names on the list, I think the next name that pops out for me is Ed Dodds. Ed Dodds was my number 2 back in 2021, and I think he pulled his name out of the running back then. But I see him as a true personnel talent guy, and the Colts, for what it's worth, I think they have found some decent players. I don't think they're the best roster, and their record indicates that. But I think they have some pretty good young guys that they've developed and brought onto that team. I thought the GM was crazy, but I think Ed Dodds is a guy that they trust a lot in their organization.
Can I ask you something about Ed Dodds? Because I'm glad you brought him up. Are you concerned at all? Because he also worked in Seattle's front office with Scott Fitterer. So are you concerned we're getting a very similar type guy and similar approach coming from the Schneider, the Schneider tree really of a front office type? Because that's the only thing that I saw, and I know people have talked about him with his involvement with Indianapolis, but he also worked with Fitterer at one point too.
I mean, I think just like any successful organization like Seattle was during that time, a lot of guys, came from that from that Seattle organization and went on to other places and, had varying levels of success. But I think with Ed Dodds, I think he established himself outside of Seattle. And so I think it's possible to come from the same place but be two different types of guys. I think Ed Dodds and Scott Fitterer, personality-wise, and I don't know a whole lot about Ed Dodds, but I don't think he's just the type of guy that just goes with it based on what I've read. But a lot of what I read was 2 years ago. So I will say that, but he just doesn't seem to be a guy that just goes along with whatever. And so I want a guy like that. But again, I'm pretty much focused on the idea that he would, like, we have a bad roster. Let's just keep it straight. Like, we have no depth. We have no day 2, day 3 gems. An analytical guy isn't going to help with that. A cap specialist isn't going to help with identifying those guys. So I want a guy who could come along and not just, bring his expertise, for talent evaluation. You know what? And this is a part of the business I don't truly understand from a personnel perspective. But I want a guy who comes and has enough bandwidth or enough cachet around the league to be like, hey, look, you scouted with me back here, over here. I want you to come and join me in Carolina. Like, that's the type of GM I want. I think when Scott Fitterer came along, I think he just inherited the people that Rule had been working with Herney. I'm not sure, but I think he inherited a lot of people. I don't think he built his own scouting staff. I want a GM who's going to bring a whole new scouting staff, because, like, it's not, the GM can't be everywhere around the country looking at these guys in college. Like, it's about who you employ in all these different regions that can get to these, these big universities, these small universities. I want somebody who can come out and build a whole new scouting staff and has the pull to be able to have good scouts to follow them, and he can lead them and he can trust them. It felt like sometimes with Scott Fitterer and the group that he had, I don't know if they had true, alignment within the scouting department. And I think a lot of times what we ended up with was a result of, I'm gonna let you get your guy here and I'm gonna let you get your guy there, but not truly trusting and knowing, that these guys had done all the diligence. And I'm sure they did their jobs, but I felt like they sucked. So I want new guys, and I want somebody who can bring in a group, not just be good at eyeing talent and evaluating talent themselves, but can employ a group of people who can do that. So I believe, because Ed Dodds has been doing this for a while, I think he can be a type of guy like that. And I'll just keep it there, because when I look at Mike Disner, you talked about Samir being added to the list. I mean, we know Greenberg and Alec Hallaby. I think he's an analytics type guy too. Cap, I don't know. But Champ Kelly may be another guy on this list who's about talent. I don't know much about Brandon Brown, to be honest. But anyway, I'll just stop it right there. I'll just say my top 2 people from the names that are here and the one that isn't on here is going to be Adam Peters and Ed Dodds. And I mean, and to me, anybody else that they would select from this list outside of Dan Morgan and Samir Suleiman, to me, they'll be the same type of guy, would bring the same type of value.
I will say this before we go to Ricky, because I know we've harped on Fitterer and Suleiman and everyone else. I think the one positive they did do with this team was cap management. That was something that Dave Gettleman was awful at, and something Marty Herney was terrible at with contracts. And Carolina is sitting at the top half of the league this year in cap space. And I think that they deserve credit for that. They weren't great always with contracts. And it was mentioned before, the Brian Burns snafu. They still have not gotten a deal done with him. But I think they deserve a little bit of credit for some of that cap numbers, because Carolina is sitting in the positive. And a couple years ago, we were sitting with Matt Khalil contracts that were disastrous. That's the one that comes to mind. There's a couple others that I'm forgetting, but I just wanted to throw that out there. But Ricky, your top out of this list candidates for GM.
Yeah, JJ made a really interesting point, and it's something that I noticed earlier, is that when I went through this list and I looked at the teams that these names came from, I realized real quickly that there was like an A side and a B side. And the guys that came from the franchises that I was interested in and that I did my legwork on, the Kansas City, the San Francisco, the Philadelphia, and the Baltimore Ravens. That was the organizations that I love the way that they are run from the inside standpoint. I think that they have longevity. I think that they have intuitiveness, and I think that they still operate from traditional standpoints as far as player evaluation and getting the best talent on the field. Um, Alec Hallaby was probably the only analytical guy that I was super in tune with that I know very much about that was on my list. Um, so I guess by default, out of this list, it's going to be Alec Hallaby. I talked myself into Champ Kelly today when I was recording an episode of Kitty Lit podcast. Actually, was going through everything and was starting to read off some things, and I realized that Champ Kelly is a hodgepodge of a dude, man. His history has a really wide scope. I don't know how familiar everybody is with him. But real quick, before I get into him, what JJ was touching on that I felt 100% like I probably had a very similar process as what JJ was doing. My guys that I wanted was Adam Peters, Ian Cunningham, Joe Ortiz, Ray Agnew Jr., and Will McClay. They were all player development guys. And Joe Ortiz is the Baltimore guy that I was expecting to see on this list, not Nick Mateo. And Nick Mateo's only been there for 4 years. And so it's really hard for me to sit there and look at an analytics and cap guy for the Baltimore Ravens and say, yeah, that's that Ozzie Newsome connection that I was looking for. That's the comfort feeling that I would get from going down that tree, right? It's not there with that candidate. So it gives me pause and it says, well, why do I want just another person just because they came from Baltimore and they've been there for 4 years? I want the proven guy. I want the guy that has been instrumental in putting these pieces on the field. What I like about Hallaby, I'll start there. 16 seasons with the Eagles, so he's been there for a long time, right? He's seen a lot of different things. Now, he hasn't been at the one position for 16 years. He hasn't even been at two positions. He's moved his way up throughout those ranks. So this is a guy that has earned his keep to get to where he is. Per the team site, what they deem his responsibilities is that he's focused on player evaluation, roster management, and resource allocation, with a particular emphasis on integrating traditional and analytical methods in decision making. I mean, it sounds good, right? At least they can write up a nice little excerpt for the guy. But I also do appreciate the emphasis on integrating traditional and analytical methods in decision making, because I do think that there is value in some of these next gen type of numbers and research and kind of numerical data that can be sorted and show trends and tendencies. There is value in that for me. I just don't want that to be what the game of football boils down to. I still want there to be evaluation on what somebody has done on the field, what their production has been, and what they can offer to your team, how they fit that mold. There's another guy that's interesting to me for two reasons, though. Kai Harley, the New Orleans Saints cap guy. I think it's like a twofold, right? If you take him away from New Orleans, they're going to have to figure out how to do their whole tango that they've been doing for the last 5-6 years of getting in completely over water and then working some sort of, third level wizardry to fix that and then go sign a washed up quarterback to $80 million. So I like the idea of taking that away from New Orleans. I just don't know that I necessarily need that to be our GM. The icky feeling that I get from all of these names, and with the foreboding warnings of Dan Morgan's internal support within the organization, this feels very, very much so like what they are hinting at is already almost decided. That Dan Morgan will be this player development side. He's going to be our pro personnel. He's going to be our scouting guy. And that doesn't make me feel comfortable. And then they're saying that these are the guys that are going to come in and take us to the next level on that Samir Suleiman side. These are the guys that we think have a little bit more of a well-rounded history than Samir, but these are the guys that Samir is aspiring to be similar to in a way. And it almost seems like they have this relationship and marriage in mind, that it's going to be difficult now that if these are your only candidates and you're not going to go and get some of those player developmental guys and interview them as well. If this is all you're going with, you're probably looking at a twofold situation as far as having two different departments for that front office delegation, in my mind.
And too many cooks in the kitchen.
Too many. Yeah, it's just you're not simplifying anything, right? So like, why would you make it more difficult on yourself when you've already had a really difficult time? Real quick, just to touch on Champ Kelly, and then I'll switch it off. I think what I really liked about him, man, is that before the NFL, he was certified NFL contract advisor and general manager / wide receivers coach for Lexington Horsemen of the United Indoor Football. Anytime that you can be a general manager / wide receivers coach for United Indoor Football League, Lexington Horsemen, I'm intrigued, man. I'm not going to lie. You spend 5 days up in the office. You come down on Saturdays and Sundays. He works on breaks and releases. I mean, I'm into it, man. I think that's a really cool thing that he's doing. I don't know that it makes him qualified to be an NFL GM, especially not of my Carolina Panthers. But he has done a really good job, man. And the guys out there in Las Vegas have nothing but rave reviews for him. He's in his second season with the Raiders. They had the gall to take Jimmy G out and go Aiden O'Connell. That at least shows some sort of fortitude or gumption. I don't know how much, because, I mean, what's the long game with Jimmy G, right? I don't think that he was like we're going to have our franchise quarterback for the next decade type of situation there. But they did try it out with Aiden O'Connell. Kelly was involved with the Broncos as well. We talked about the other, I forget who we were just speaking about with
Peters, yeah.
Yes, Peters. Talking about that, Kelly was with the Broncos when they won 4 AFC West Division titles from 2011 to 2014. When he was the director of pro personnel, the Broncos signed 8 veteran free agents that went on to make the Pro Bowl, including guard Louis Vasquez in 2013 and wide receiver Emmanuel Sanders in 2014, who that was their first trip to the Pro Bowl was with Denver after being signed to that team. And he was the pro player personnel guy. So at least there is some linear tracking that you can do with his history as far as bringing players in and knowing how to build a roster and making decisions with the roster. I do like him. So out of that list, man, I would say it's Champ Kelly, Alec Hallaby for me.
Yeah, and just on Champ Kelly real quick, I take a lot of stock too in just how players are with certain, guys and candidates, and everyone wants him back, both him and Antonio Pierce. And a lot of times, a phrase we use in news a lot is "the streets don't lie." You look at some of these fans too, and it's hard to put a lot of stock in that, but a lot of times when these fans are warning you against a coach, they're probably right. And a lot of people were warning us about Frank Reich, but we stuck to it. Yeah. And there's others in the past too that have come up. And there's one guy, and we'll get into coaches later on here with Brian Johnson, but he's another one that has come up. And I remember tweeting it out I think it was in December. You see his name trending, fire Brian Johnson on Twitter. That's pretty damn telling on what you're going to get. But on the Champ Kelly thing, I just wanted to mention this. I put this out yesterday. He also has ties to Frank Smith in Chicago. They work together. And I know he is a possible candidate. And then obviously Brian Callahan also worked with him in Denver too. So there is ties there with the coaches as well. Bryson, candidates for GM. Who do you like?
Yeah. I'm not going to act like I know a lot about these guys overall. I do know a little bit about Kai Harley because of my brother being a Saints fan and me mentioning his name as a potential candidate in Carolina and him being upset because, like Ricky mentioned, he is the key cog in the wheel of getting the Saints out of cap hell every single year. But yeah, I agree with Ricky. I think that, to me, it seems like they already have I think there's two options here. They already have their pro personnel guy, Dan Morgan, in the building, and they're wanting to pair him with an analytics guy, or they're wanting to hire a coach that kind of is going to fill in that GM role of player scouting. So a coach like a Bill Belichick or Jim Harbaugh, and kind of keeping that open for that coach. Based off of the list of candidates that we've seen so far. I, too, am a big fan of Adam Peters. Like JJ mentioned earlier, I think that he's going to be super selective. He's only going to take a job that he wants because he is probably the hottest candidate for potential GM openings. Ed Dodds, again, was involved in the search the first time around and pulled out probably because he talked with David Tepper and said no and was turned off immediately. So I'd be interesting to see if he takes an interview or not. And then Mike Greenberg, I really like his ESPN radio stint, a Get Up show on ESPN. I think that I didn't know he had any front office experience, but it sounds like that they're willing to go a different route and try something different. So I'm a fan of that. Just kidding, obviously.
One thing I want to mention. Well, actually, let's go to Kevin. Kevin, go ahead.
Okay, I'll keep it brief. And just to warn you guys, I'm driving up Interstate 81. I'm near West Virginia. So if my signal started to fade in and out, forgive me in advance.
Country
I'm about
roads. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm about
Go ahead.
72 miles away from my delivery. So, but yeah, real quickly, number one, JJ hit it off. I'm also have been a big Adam Peters guy. When you think about after the 49ers lost the Super Bowl to the Ravens I think that was 2013, I believe, or whatever season. Yeah, so okay, 2012. Yeah, that's when the lights went out in New Orleans and all that stuff. But the 49ers, post the Harbaugh era, fell into an abyss. So I'm looking at teams that, recently went through hell, came out and have been consistent lately. So for me, Adam Peters and for the 49ers will be one, that I like because I remember stupidly being one of the people when Trent Williams asked for $20 million a year to be the left tackle. I thought, who want to pay that much for a left tackle? And now that's like chop pennies because, the market keeps going up, when they got him from the Redskins or whatever. But so he would be my number one, number two. And again, because I'm driving, I can't see the name, so y'all can let me know. The guy from the Eagles.
Alec Hallaby.
Yes. Again, the Eagles went through a period before they hired Sirianni before their Super Bowl year where they were, pretty much third, fourth place consistently in the NFC East, and ever since Andy Reid left, they kind of were just, not getting a job done. But Philadelphia, especially over the last few years, have consistently been extremely good on both sides of the trenches. Because we're going to do this rebuild. I want some people that's like they know what they're talking about in the trenches as well. The Eagles, obviously, in spite of their late season tailspin this year, but just far as offensive line quality and players that they bring in, and also the way they stat their defensive line, I definitely like that aspect of it. Being a trench guy, I'm a firm believer that you can have all pros at all your skill positions, but if your trenches is trash, you're just gonna have a bunch of highlights and not a lot of wins. So, so I like him. And third, again, I don't know if this gentleman is up there, but I saw it on Twitter before I hit the road when I left Nashville this morning. The guy, look like he's the black guy for the Lions.
There's a young dude. There's a young dude for the Lions, Mike Disner. I think he's a white dude.
No, this was a black dude that I saw. It looked like a slightly older black gentleman.
I think you're thinking of the guy from Dallas,
Ray Agnew. He's talking about Ray Agnew.
Oh,
yeah, you could be talking about Ray Agnew Jr. I didn't see the Ray interview.
Yeah, the junior part. Okay, that was it. Yeah, because they were talking about how him and Ben Johnson and Evero all had the same agent, and they were saying how that could be a possibility. And again, prior to this season, last season, Detroit's been the laughing stock of the NFL. And now they got a top 5 offensive line. They got one of the better, most improved defensive lines as well. I was skeptical when they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs as high as they did, but it turns out that was a better move than originally speculated, because I had him as a late first round, early second round guy. So for me, those would be my 3 candidates, particularly just based on the fact of they were with teams that were played very poorly for a stint for multiple years. And then lately, those teams have been playing consistently well with the 49ers, Eagles, and the Lions. So those three gentlemen would be the ones that I like. Again, I think analytics are okay, but I don't need another Steve Urkel, trying to run my football team. I need dudes from the longest yard, running the personnel department.
Can I piggyback real quick off of his
go ahead.
Lions thing? Sorry, man. But he was talking about Ray Agnew Jr., and I don't know if he actually got the interview request or not. But if not, that pairing that he's talking about with pairing a Detroit front office person with Ben Johnson, that also plays with Mike Disner, which is something worth thinking about. That he was really instrumental in the hiring of Dan Campbell as well. He was part of that search crew that went and got Dan Campbell, that was trying to, the way that they said, was shepherd in a new era of success that was really important in hiring a culture-driven leader. So that's something at least worth thinking about too, is that could be a pairing between coach and GM.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's no secret I want Ben Johnson as the coach before we get into that. But mine would be Ray Agnew, number one. And like Bryson, I'm not going to sit up here and tell you guys I know everything about these guys, because I sure as hell don't. But he's got ties to North Carolina, Winston-Salem native, played football at NC State. Just looking at some of my notes, you look at the Lions draft picks over the last couple of years, they've hit on day 1, day 2, day 3 picks across the board. Obviously, I don't know how much hands he's got in that, but he is the assistant GM. And he's also had experience with first-year coaches in both Sean McVay and Dan Campbell. So there's a benefit there. Going to Mike Disner, there's obviously a tie with him being at the Lions. Just doing some research on him, a little concerning stuff. And I think some of these guys all have, some baggage, but there's some articles out there, Sports Illustrated going to source it. But apparently Mike Disner was allegedly a part of the Cardinals 2018 burner phone scheme that I'm sure all of us are aware of. So, and he, according to this article, according to a court filing obtained by Compare.bet, Disner allegedly gave burner phones to prominent members of the organization to communicate with suspended general manager Steve Keim. So that is out there. There is some baggage. We all know Tepper, so I'm not really surprised by that at all. But also Disner, I believe, was, and I posted this on Twitter today, had a pretty big role in contracts with Palmer, I want to say Fitzgerald, a couple other guys that were
Patrick Peterson,
Chandler
Jones,
thank you,
Ramathu, all the big names.
So he's had a pretty big part in that. Alec Hallaby is another guy that I was interested in. I listened to some of his stuff. He spoke at a analytical sports conference, and listened to some of the stuff he had to say. And he spoke about the complexity of offenses and how that can benefit teams, which I thought was really interesting. Adam Schefter tweeted out this earlier today that Panthers have been especially eyeing Hallaby for quite some time now. So that's just something to keep an eye on. It looks like he'll be interviewing on Friday. The problem with all this, and I'm sure maybe you guys have seen this, but Edgar, he's been on the show many times, but he put me onto this in The Athletic. The Athletic put out an article when all of this stuff came out with Doug Peterson and basically the fall of the Eagles after their Super Bowl. And apparently Alec Hallaby and Peterson were not on good terms. And in this article, it says Hallaby, this is quote, Hallaby is something of an interlooper. They say he carries his influence with Lowry in part because of a close relationship with fellow Harvard grad. Others think Hallaby is brilliant, simply willing to fight for what he believes in. Just trying to read this quickly, but it sounds like there was some rough goings there between Hallaby, and he tried to force his analytics more into the scouting department than the scouting department wanted, which could also bring up some issues. So just wanted to throw that out there because that has been reported. I think that was a couple of years ago.
Well, Curtis, can I add something real quick before you switch gears? You bringing that up, in addition to some of the things that's been discussed about these other guys and, their strengths, being on the analytical side, it has me thinking. Bryce brought up a great point, about the fact that they could be looking at some of these coach candidates who want roster control and they want the personnel thing to fall under their purview. Then you pair them with an analytical guy or like a salary cap guy, like that's a good pairing. But when you bring up this thing about Hallaby, and I'm sorry, of course they would go in and out while I'm talking, but with Hallaby and this other guy, it has me concerned because I'm like, would you want a guy that has a history of being like an interlooper or like being an inside man for the owner or what have you, working alongside a coach when we're trying to establish alignment? I hope now, just given who's on the list right now and what we're trying to accomplish, I hope that they're just talking to these guys that they've been interested in. And I don't know which is going to come first, the coach or the GM, but I hope that they can go through and have their list and kind of rack them and stack them, one or the other. And then once they make the first hire, the chicken or the egg, they can pair the chicken with the egg or the egg with the chicken.
Gotta be.
Yeah, I hope that's what they do. I don't think that's what they do. I just hope that they're just doing that, and say, okay, we got this guy. He seems like he'll be the best fit with this coach, and get the coach to weigh in or get the GM to weigh in on the coach. But I definitely don't want someone who would be problematic for the coach that they hire.
Well, and Hallaby, to go on to this, now that I have the quote that I wanted to pull, he was clearly aligned with Howie Roseman, and we all wish we had the front office Philadelphia did. The draft picks, the way they acquire free agents, every time it comes out on ESPN, they're signing some, we all want it. But this was pulled from this article. It said the young executive, this is talking about Hallaby, with an Ivy League pedigree, carries with him the kind of reputation that causes football lifers to scoff. According to multiple sources, a rift grew between Hallaby and some members of the coaching staff and scouting department. So that is definitely concerning. I mean, that's out there.
It is, and that's all I'm fearful of, is just that, man, I've been waiting for a long time to get to a point where we could reset fully and get a GM and a coach together and that can have alignment. And so it's like, please get that right. I don't care who of these names you pick, as long as they get along with the head coach, and they all have the same vision. So when decisions are made, we can know that these guys, not that they have to agree on every single roster move or whatever, but we know that they have the type of relationship to where you can trust that they came to a consensus, and then the results on the field show that, but I just don't want any drama, because Carolina is the place that nobody likes.
Got enough of it, man.
Nobody wants to talk about Carolina unless there's something goofy going on.
Mm-hmm.
I want us to be respected at this point, around the league, because it's too hard for us to get respect based on where we are, based on the kind of market we have. Like, we have to have respected men around the league, and I don't want that little drama, crap going on, because everybody wants to report when we got the little stupid stuff going on. So anyway.
Well, and just not to harp on Hallaby, because Mike K put this out tonight. He covered Philadelphia for some time, and he put out tonight, he asked someone that was a former staff member for the Eagles about Hallaby's, how he relates to a coaching staff, and the person told him he's a rare, diverse talent that has incredible feel for talent evaluation and scheme on a much deeper level than many think, given his background in analytics. So some positive there, but I just wanted to throw that out there just so we have both sides.
That is good, but I think that you guys make a really good point, though, about this waiting this long for a full reset. Wouldn't it be one of the most tepid things in the world to finally get to a point where we're at a full reset and he separately handles everything, where he compartmentalizes each of these hires and says, oh, we want alignment, we want this cohesive vision. So I'm going to pick this guy. You pick this guy over here, and we'll just hope that it kind of works without actually going about the alignment route.
Yeah, we can't have that. I mean, and I don't care. It feels like, in my mind, the GM hire, I guess conventionally, would come before the coach. But there are really some strong coaches out there. I mean, be it Ben Johnson, be it Jim Harbaugh, Mike McDonald. Like, these guys, to me, can really kind of pick their spot. So if you have a chance to get one of the top, I would say top 5, like if they want to be in Carolina, you go to that coach and you say, hey, look, these are our top GMs. You can look at the list and see if they got relationships with these guys and say, hey, look, do you get along with this guy? Or is it anybody else from this list that you know of through your network that you would love to work with based on the things that they've done with their organizations in their history? Like, let them, if you're going to go coach first, let that coach pick the guy that you know that he's in alignment with. Don't force Dan Morgan in whatever role you want with him, or Samir Suleiman, or whatever, that they might be thinking about. If you really covet the coach, hire the coach, let him pick his guy. If you hire the GM, if he happens to want a certain coach, then you let him go with the coach because you really value the GM's talents that much. But don't, like you said, don't compartmentalize these searches and recruitments and then pick one and say, you gotta make it work with this guy. And that goes too for even the thought. I love Ejiro Evero. Don't force a coach to have to accept Evero if he doesn't want him.
Yep.
So that's all I gotta say on that.
I want to talk about this before we get into the coaches, because I think it's important, and a lot of us, at least me, I know, and I think Bryson, is getting a search firm that Tepper has hired, Sportsology Group, I think they're called. And I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that. And let's go to Kevin, because we haven't heard from him in a bit. Just, I don't know if you've looked into them at all, Kev, at all, but just your thoughts on Tepper bringing in an outside firm to help with both the GM and head coach search.
Can you come back to me? I got to find a place to park. I need to focus. Can you come back to me in about 5 minutes?
Yes, that's cool. You're
Okay.
working hard. You're doing you're double shifting here. Bryson, any thoughts on the outside firm?
Yeah, I think we mentioned it last episode. I mean, it shows that he is at least changing in some areas, Tepper, that is, and not solely relying on his own ability to select a coach or GM, because obviously it hasn't worked. And I think that the firm has a good history of helping other franchises like the 49ers and I believe the Steelers. But ultimately, I think that what they're doing is they're gathering lists like what we see in front of us, pretty extensive list that I hope continues to grow on both sides of the head coach and general manager, and just helps David Tepper make a better informed decision on where to go to get Carolina on the right track to being a successful franchise again. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a good move, and I'm excited that he's at least changed in that area and admitted his fault that he's not the correct guy to be making this decision solely on his own in the NFL for his franchise.
All right, let's leave it at that. Let's go to the coaches. Who are your guys', let's say, like top 3 to 5?
I'll start since I'm already
ahead.
talking. So yeah, number 1, I think Curtis and I are on the same page. Ben Johnson, that's who both of us wanted last year. He was our number 1 guy last year. He's our number 1 guy this year. From North Carolina, walk on at UNC. Shout out to UNC. They're currently whooping NC State's ass right now in basketball. I mean, he's a homegrown guy. Obviously, has created one of the best offenses in the NFL. Turned Jared Goff's career around. The things he does on offense is just extremely creative and really has been effective. I mean, the Lions won their first division title in like 30 years. I think that it's what he's done has spoken for itself. So he's my number 1. Number 2 is not on this list for me, and it's where JJ and I align, is Jim Harbaugh. I'm a big Jim Harbaugh fan. I think him winning the championship has only the college football championship has only helped his resume for the NFL. Jim Harbaugh is a proven winner. He's won everywhere he's been. He is a culture setter. He is a talent evaluator. He's everything that Carolina needs, really. He's going to put David Tepper in his place. He's not going to be afraid to tell him no. But I don't know if that's what David Tepper wants ultimately. So I think that's maybe part of the reason why he's not on this list. And then another guy that actually Ricky turned me on to is my number 3 guy is Mike McDonald. Wasn't really super informed of him until I listened to some of Ricky's stuff and Ricky talking about him. The defensive coordinator for Baltimore, who comes from the Jim Harbaugh or the Harbaugh family, being a defensive coordinator for both of them. He is coordinating one of the best defenses in the NFL. His system has I'll let Ricky talk about it more, but his system has really caused issues even for Ben Johnson when the Ravens played the Lions. It's a system that has been very effective defensively, but I weigh, do I want to bring in a defensive coach and take a chance that he hires an offensive coordinator that isn't right for Bryce? I don't know. That's something that you weigh when you're talking about hiring a defensive-minded coach. But I mean, Mike McDonald, I'm sure, has connections across the league, coming from Michigan and then obviously in Baltimore. And Todd Monken's offense on the opposite side of the ball where he's at in Baltimore has made strides as well, which I think, Monken's on this list as well. So I'm sure he's got connects there. It's Ben Johnson, Jim Harbaugh, and Mike McDonald for me in order.
Ricky, we'll might as well go right to you then.
Okay. I think that Ben Johnson is still my number 1, as much as I love Mike McDonald, but it is like a 1A, 1B for me personally. I just think that when you look at Ben Johnson, his emphasis on the offensive line and the run game also is what's so appealing to me about Ben Johnson, because a lot of times when you look at these offensive coordinators that are popular and trendy names, like even Mike McDaniel to an extent, right? He's this really energetic, charismatic guy, and he's kind of thought of as like this like mad scientist as far as like innovating new things and doing like crazy concepts and the full speed motion. It's with Ben, it's a little bit more of sustainability in his approach, I think, for the offense that he builds. And he 100% builds the offense to the pieces that he has on the roster. That's what I love about Mike McDonald so much. That's why they're my 1A and my 1B. The adaptability and the emphasis on building based off of what you have available to you, not what you want people to be able to project to be, but what you have, and putting them in the best positions for success while also creating advantages from schematic and conceptual standpoints. I think that's where he is in a class of his own without being in a Shanahan system class, because I also struggle really hard not having my number 1 coaching candidate just being from the Shanahan system, to be completely honest, because I keep on seeing every single iteration that people keep trotting out there of it, it's successful. And the focus on protections, the different things that they can do with the motions and kind of the deception aspect of that offense and keeping people guessing and keeping it unbalanced for the defense, it's very appealing to me. But Ben Johnson's is much more individual. And I think for Bryce Young, I like the idea of having an individually tailor-made offense built to him. I think that he can piece together what we have right now with the offensive line unit into a capable unit based off of the schemes that he would run and the protections that he would keep in and call for the offense that he would design. Mike McDonald, though, man, is really hard for me to pass up on too, because I think that what he did, and there was a great write-up by Derek Klassen, I believe it was on the 33rd team, is who he wrote for, but he was going over it and he called him the coolest and his favorite head coach candidate of this cycle. And there are some serious heavyweight head coach candidates in this cycle. So for somebody that is a pretty well-renowned evaluator in Derek Klassen, his ability to kind of like know the quarterback position is where his specialty is as far as his analysis. For him to think that Mike Macdonald is the best candidate also held a little bit of weight for me because I've done my individual looking into from Mike Macdonald. I've convinced myself of what he was able to do. The high remarks coming from like Leslie Frazier and well-respected people in NFL circles that speak about Mike Macdonald. His start being on the offensive side with quality control and having a really great understanding of what offenses try to do. So how he approaches that is by eliminating their advantages and creating issues for them in that regard. Ben Johnson's kind of similar in the fact that where he grew or where he cut his teeth with offensive schematics was from seeing so much of it fail at so many stops that he had been involved in. He had been involved in some really bad offenses, and he saw people continuously trying to force that to work and not accepting that they had to be able to identify and change aspects that weren't working. That's what he's known for. That's what Mike Macdonald is known for. So those are my two. And I will take either one of them with a huge smile on my face. And as a consolation prize, I'll have Bobby Slowick as my third choice. That's not to discredit the Mike Vrabels and the Jim Harbaughs. I think that they're terrific football coaches. But I have already come to this agreement with myself that I want a new coach. And maybe that's really short-sighted of me to say that I'm willing to pass up on a Harbaugh or a Mike Vrabel. But Vrabel just got done with his job. And it's unexpected that he's available, but he just got done with his job and it was a tough year. I think he's going to have success wherever he goes. And if he comes here, I'll accept it and be very happy about it because he does lend credibility immediately to this team being the head coach. And Harbaugh, I think, does the same. I just really like the prospect of Ben Johnson, Mike Macdonald, or Bobby Slowick as the future of my franchise.
Kevin, are you able to go before we get to JJ? Oh, and no, he isn't. Okay, so JJ, what do you got? Who's your top?
I'll be lying if I didn't say Jim Harbaugh was my top. So Jim Harbaugh is my top. I don't need to elaborate about it. It's very personal and I'm very biased. The last time I experienced winning as a fan was with Jim Harbaugh as my head coach. I haven't experienced a winning season since as a fan. And so I'm a believer in Jim Harbaugh. I get why people don't like him. I get that he's brash. I'll give you like a little tidbit of one of the reasons I like Jim Harbaugh that has nothing to do with X's and O's. It's just about his understanding of people. Well, I'll start with it's two. It started with Alex Smith. Alex Smith had been viewed as a bust, out in San Francisco prior to 2011. And there was no other way to look at it. I mean, he did show some flashes with the previous coach being Mike Singletary, but nothing that would give anybody confidence that he could win big-time ball games. Jim Harbaugh came from Stanford in 2011 and took over that team. And who Alex Smith became during that season was night and day from who he had been. And he had been in the league at that point. I think that was like his 5th or 6th season. And he had a little routine that he would do with Alex Smith where he would go to him before the game started and would hit him in the shoulder pads and get him riled up. And it felt like Alex felt like he was a brand new cat, and it showed on the field. And that year, they were a muff punt away from going to the Super Bowl. That was 2011, 2012 playoffs. The following year, Alex Smith started out the season, and he was leading the league in completion percentage or something like that, but then he suffered a concussion in a Colin Kaepernick. Everybody knows the rise of Colin Kaepernick. But if you would have saw Colin Kaepernick the year before, you would have thought that it was no way he was going to make it in the NFL based on how he looked in the preseason. Colin Kaepernick came in ready to play day one. And in the media, and this was the point I was going to make, Jim Harbaugh had a rule for Colin Kaepernick that he had to keep his answers like less than 5 words. And it was so frustrating for the media out there because like anything they asked Kaepernick, even when he was this rising star, he would only give him like a 5-word answer. But that was all Harbaugh. It was part of the reason that people were frustrated with him. But one of the things that made you realize like he really cares about this dude because he's trying to protect him while he is, trying to groom him and grow him because he don't want to get him or let him get himself in any trouble with the media while he develops. Well, we know how that transpired after Jim left, right? Eventually. I say all that to say this. They went on a great run with Jim. The way people feel about him was mixed, but look at what the team did when they fired him. Patrick Willis retired. Justin Smith retired. Guys didn't want to play for that team anymore. It never really came out like that, but I knew based on research what happened between him and Barkett. Regardless, I won't spend too much time on that. Jim is my guy. I think Dave Tepper would be crazy to not at least explore that option because of the instant credibility, because of the culture. People get concerned about what Jim hasn't done in recent times in the NFL because he's been in college, right? And I don't think that that's a situation you have to worry about. Jim has been connected to the game at the NFL level, even while in college. His brother still has coached at a high level. John is still tapped in, obviously. He has the best team in the NFL right now. Mike McDonald, who is 1B for Ricky, that guy left Jim Harbaugh to come to John Harbaugh and came in and instantly has like one of the top flight defenses in the NFL. You saw that same top flight defense on display Monday night, basically making the guy who probably should have won the Heisman, well, at least, he was second or whatever, but we saw Michael Penix Jr. look like a world beater against everybody they played all year long. And Jim Harbaugh made him look like he could barely play football on a national stage. That same type of defensive philosophy is what Mike McDonald is doing in Baltimore right now that's making Shanahan defenses look crazy. So if you like Mike McDonald, if you get Jim Harbaugh, you might not get Mike McDonald, but you're going to get a defense that's suited to play the best offenses in the NFL. Jim Harbaugh had that in San Francisco with Vic Fangio. He would find another guy or maybe bring a guy with him from Michigan to do the same thing at the NFL level, just like Mike McDonald came from Michigan to do the same thing at the NFL level. So I think people really overthink or maybe even underthink who Jim Harbaugh could be if given the opportunity. I don't think Jim Harbaugh would come to the league without a plan to win and win early because his track record indicates that he wins very quickly, at the NFL level, just like he did at San Francisco. It's really hard to come into the league and go to 3 straight NFC championships and win one. And so that's my number 1 guy. I get off Jim. My number 2 guy is Ben Johnson. Ben was my number 1 guy until I decided to stop lying to myself. But Ben Johnson is he's everything that you all said he was. Every time I watch Detroit play, I'm impressed, by his like you said, his run designs, his run scheme, the way his offensive line plays, the fact that they're so physical at the point of attack. Everything is well designed, well conceived. The best thing that Ben Johnson did, in my opinion, as a coach, as an offensive play caller, is that when Jared Goff went to Detroit, he was almost written off. Like he was going to be a bridge for Detroit while they found their actual rookie, franchise quarterback to pair with their new coach. Everybody knew that Jared Goff had some talent. We saw, some of that when he was with McVay. But everybody just figured he was going to be like this Teddy Bridgewater type dude in Detroit, and then they were going to draft a guy to turn it over to him. Ben Johnson got with Jared Goff, and Jared Goff got with Ben Johnson, and together, Jared Goff has reestablished himself as one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And I don't think very many offensive coordinators could have done that with Jared Goff, especially like what Ricky said. And I think that this is something that's very special about Ben Johnson. He's managed in a world full of Shanahan and Shanahan clones. He's managed to establish himself as an offensive mastermind without doing the Shanahan stuff. And I can't think of another offensive coordinator besides like Andy Reid who can say that. And even Andy Reid and Shanahan, they truly come from the same tree.
Mm-hmm.
Ben Johnson doesn't.
It's an individual identity.
Yeah, he has an individual identity,
Yep.
and eventually he's going to have his own tree.
Absolutely.
And I think that's very unique. And the one thing that, as hard as I am on Tepper nowadays, I will give him credit for having the foresight last season to try to get him. And so I don't want to take that credit away from Tepper because Tepper was right with that. And I think he would be right if he got him again. So Jim Harbaugh is my guy just for all the reasons I mentioned. But if we were going new, it would definitely be Ben Johnson first. And then I would have to say after that, I would probably go with Slowick. And that's just because I want somebody who has a not necessarily about being from the Shanahan tree. I just think nobody else in the league put more work into Bryce Young than Bobby Slowick did last season, ahead of them thinking they might draft him. And so I don't think there's another coach that can walk in and meet with Dave Tepper and say, here's my plan for maximizing Bryce Young. I think Bobby Slowick will have more homework and more details, more film than anybody that he's competing with as it relates to Bryce Young. But I think both Ben Johnson and Bobby Slowick would be equally good for Bryce Young. And honestly, the first coach I mentioned, Jim Harbaugh, while he may not look exactly the same with, as he would with Ben Johnson and Bobby Slowick, I think Jim Harbaugh could be good for Bryce Young too. He just may not be the superstar we all hoped he would become and be more of the game manager that we see Jim Harbaugh tend to win with. And so, but that's, those are my top three. I mean, I think you hit it good when you said what you said about Mike Vrabel. The reason I've been going, so hard for Mike Vrabel is because, like, in my gut, I feel like he's a really good coach. And I think he would give us that credibility that I really, really, really want. And that's because I came from a place that was credible, right? And Carolina has never been that. Even when I was always being a fan, just at a distance, like nobody ever checked for Carolina. I want Carolina to be thought of as a team that may be in a small market, but when you go play Carolina, you better pack your lunch because it's going to be a long day, and Mike Vrabel is the type of guy that if he leads your team on the field, like everybody know that you're a serious football team. And so I just don't want, like we talked about some great candidates, I just don't want to start getting too far beyond the list of names that we talked about before you get to Mike Vrabel.
All right, let's go to Kevin. What do you got for your top coaches?
Yeah, as far as my top coaches, how many you doing? Like top 2, 3? What's the limit here?
Yeah, top 3, 4, whatever you got.
All right. Well, for me, I've always been on record for saying I want my head coach to be more than an X's and O's guy. Like I said, leader of men, builds culture. Like those to me are just as equally as important as, what plays are being called. So for me, when I think of coaches like that, I know Ben Johnson is popular, but my questions about him is he someone that builds culture? Now, you think being around Dan Campbell, it would have, but, it just seems like he's the latest hotshot, offensive coordinator. And some people are better off as coordinators than head coaches. That's just my thing. But as far as my personal choices, I would have to say that Number one would be, if available, Jim Harbaugh. Number two would be the guy from Baltimore. Y'all was talking about McDonald. And then number three, for me, would be Frank Smith down in Miami. Those would be, my three choices as far as, head coach. Real quickly, as far as Harbaugh, I feel like he's the type of coach that would tell Tupper, shut the fuck up, sit the fuck back, I got this. And he got the cachet to do that because, Jim don't care nothing about quitting on your ass. If you're getting on his nerves, he'll leave and be hired somewhere else, So I think that he's got enough to make Dave and Nicole sit on that little golf cart and just be quiet and sign these checks. So that's what I like about him. I would say that McDonald, for the same reasons already, I don't want to regurgitate what's already been said. Just the fact that he dismantles all the top offenses here, even though I think Evero has done a very, very solid, good job in his first year here. I just think McDonald's just on another level with it. Now, and then number three, of course, for me would be Frank Smith. I'm a big fan of the Mike Shanahan tree. And I just think that, obviously we don't have a Tyreek Hill or a Waddle or a Mustard in our backfield currently. I get that, but I just think that, with the way that he, the way he learned up under the 49ers and what he's done so far with Miami is just something that really catches my eye. And if I can do an honorable mention, again, I didn't realize he was fired until you guys just told me, because like I said, I've been driving all day. Mike Vrabel, yeah, that he definitely fits my leader of men, culture builder type guy. So those would be the four that if either one of them were made our head coach, I would be ecstatic.
Yeah, I'll be reiterating much of what you guys said. I think Ben Johnson, clear cut number one for me. I don't know how you can watch the Lions and not like that guy. Of what he does schematically with that team is incredible. And I also give him a lot of credit for, he was a hot commodity last year, got a couple interviews, and to have the wherewithal to back out and say, I want to do this another year with Detroit and see what we got. And maybe I'm not ready yet. I give him a lot of credit because most guys probably wouldn't do that. So he's my clear cut number one. I also do like Jim Harbaugh for all the reasons you guys mentioned. I think Carolina could use someone who can, reset the culture around this team and this franchise and, undo some of the shit that David Tepper has done to this team. And I think Harbaugh would be great for that. I also think Vrabel is another one, another guy we haven't mentioned that I know a lot of people don't like, Bill Belichick. That's another guy who's going to tell Tepper and put him in his fucking place where he needs to be. So, but yeah, I would say Harbaugh second, Slowick three, just because of his ties to Shanahan and what he's done there with Stroud. And then obviously what JJ mentioned too, he did a lot of research on Bryce Young this offseason. So I think that would be very helpful, but he might play the card that I think, Ben Johnson played last year, stay with Houston, give it another year and, come back next year and then go back into the cycle. So I don't know if he's going to be ready yet, but I think Carolina, for some of these young guys, if they can't get Ben Johnson, they might have to take a guy a year early. Just based off of what Tepper has done and the damage he's done. I think they might have to scoop someone up like that. And then you guys mentioned Frank Smith. I think that would probably be, I think that's 4 now for my list. I think he's really genuine, a player's coach, been behind Mike McDaniel and what he's done with Miami, I think is respected. So I think that's another dark horse. And then I'll just mention this guy. I don't think it's ever going to happen because what transpired last year, but Steve Wilkes is still up there. I think he's another culture builder. We saw what he turned around this team last year. I think what's do great things for this team. I just don't think Tepper would have the gall to say he made a mistake, and I don't know if Wilkes would even take the interview. So I'll just throw that guy's name out there as well. But with all this, and I put this out in a tweet, I don't think we can discount any of these guys and put ourselves in a square box. I don't think it has to be a young offensive-minded coach. I don't think it has to be a culture setter. I don't think it has to be a defensive coordinator. I think they just need to go out and find a fucking winner for this team, because that is what is needed in Carolina. Don't matter how you get there, just figure it out. I know last year and Bryce and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, I was very against Sean Payton last year, but looking back at it, I just want a guy. I don't care if he came from the Saints. I don't care if he came from Atlanta. I don't care if he came from Tampa Bay. I don't care if he had shit going on in Michigan like Harbaugh did. Bring the guy here and give us a winner, because that's what this fan base deserves. And we've been through hell, and we've really turned into the Cleveland Browns and the New York Jets of the NFL. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. So,
hey, Curtis, can I pose a question real quick on the culture coach part of this? I've been kind of like playing around, and we got a couple minutes to go on this, or do you want to move on to something else? We can do this another time.
No, go ahead.
Okay. From a culture standpoint, the culture is a collective. It's a manifestation from the collective of people, right? So culture should already innately exist within the people in that locker room. It is the way that I would read this. There is culture with Bryce Young, with Tommy Tremble, Taylor Moton, Shaq Thompson, Derek Brown, Bradley Bozeman. Like the guys that are staples in that locker room that will be staples going forward for this team. That's where your culture exists already. We need a coach, not necessarily that's going to come in and instill their own culture. Like, I don't think that that's necessarily what's the most beneficial thing, in my personal opinion. I want someone that will come through, identify what this team has from a personal collective. Not necessarily on the field, right? Because I don't think that's the culture aspect of it. I think that's the on-field football identity aspect of that. And those two things are intertwined, but you have to know what the culture is in your locker room and with your players. And what a lot of these culture-setting coaches seem to do is they have a great ability to form personal bonds with their players and have a good pulse and read of what the locker room is made up of. So what I look for is I look for a coach that could do those interpersonal bonds, right? And I think that when you look at the adaptability and flexibility of coaches like Ben Johnson and Mike McDonald from an X's and O's standpoint, it tells me that they understand people. They understand individual and unique people. And they put those people in the positions to succeed because they have a vision for individual people. And Frank Smith is talked about in high regards because of that. His ability to bond with Darren Waller, right, was one of the huge selling points. And that's what was talked about for him on that NFLPA survey that happened at the end of the year. And he was the number one rated offensive coordinator. But he also has the production and the results to show and match that. If you get a guy that can build with his players, that's going to facilitate and cultivate culture, in my opinion. So I don't think you have to bring in this idea of culture. Like Mike Vrabel's not the only guy that can make culture. He's just a guy that knows exactly how to cultivate it. And you talk about bringing your lunch pail. That's exactly who he is, right? Steel lunch pails. Like and they're going to be dented up to shit. They're going to look like an old like air AC duct, right? That's what his brand is. But a brand is a little different than culture to me because the culture only exists if the people inside of it fit it. So you're going to have to bring in players as much as coaches, in my opinion, to really facilitate a culture overhaul for the Carolina Panthers.
And I'll jump in there, because obviously I've been
in your Panthers culture. So I should have honestly, I should have just asked you first about how to do this.
Well, Panthers culture thing, honestly, when I started it was due to like a whole different thought process. But when I first designed the logo for Panthers culture or playing around with logos, the first thing I designed was a picture of Cam Newton. I drew it on my computer. I was playing around with my computer trying to see if I could actually draw. I draw a lot, and that's my gift. But I never drew on a computer, but I was like, I need to design a logo for this thing. And so the first thing I came up with was a picture of Cam back when he first started growing his hair out, because I knew that Carolina and everything that Carolina was about at that time was based on who Cam Newton was and the culture that he built starting back in basically when he got drafted, but it hit its all-time peak in 2015. And the league was dabbing and everybody associated Carolina football to Cam, but it wasn't just him. It was Thomas Davis, it was Luke Kuechly, it was Ryan Khalil, it was Steve Smith, and honestly Ron Rivera. Everybody kind of poured into Carolina being this serious place, but also made up of a diverse group of fans, who all wanted and shared the goal of winning a Super Bowl. And keep pounding, was part of that, and a big part of that. And so right now, I feel like everything that I started my brand around is gone. And that's the sad part, right? It makes it hard to want to design stuff and do all that stuff. But what you said is true. The culture is about the players more so than anything. And all of those guys that I mentioned, they all embody, keep pounding, and they all believe that they were winners. Cam, even today, Cam went like 0-12 in his last 12 starts. If you saw Cam today, you would still see him as a winner, right? It doesn't matter, because the guys that played around him, they looked at him as like, I believe that we can win because he's here. I believe that we can win because Luke is out there. Derek Brown, to me, and I'm not trying to slight anybody else, Derek Brown is the only guy on this team that I can look at and be like, that guy's a winner. By how he carries himself, by how consistent he is, by obviously the things that he plays through. There's no way that Derek Brown has played in the trenches the way that he does without being hurt.
Mm-hmm.
But he comes out every week. I don't think he's ever missed a game due to injury. Maybe he has, but it might have been early. But Derek Brown is a consummate professional. He's constantly working on his craft. He's a leader of men. And unfortunately for him, he's never been part of a winner. Mm-hmm. Nobody on this roster has ever experienced winning, except for that little window of time when they was with Steve Wilkes. The reason I bring Steve Wilkes up is because that team shifted from whatever they thought or believed they were with Matt Rule to become whoever they became, or what we saw they became with Steve Wilkes. Mm-hmm. And although this might have been a miss, a miss on my part, it was the only reason during the last cycle where I felt like when Bryce and Curtis were bringing up Ben Johnson and Shane Steichen, I didn't feel they would keep Steve Wilkes, but it was one of the reasons why I felt like, well, maybe Frank Wright works, because I think they'll respond to NFL experience, credibility, and all the stuff, that I thought mattered. I didn't realize that Frank Wright was kind of a dud in terms of his personality and energy compared to Steve Wilkes. But I felt like this team responded to Steve Wilkes' energy. Steve Wilkes' thing was about accountability. Mm-hmm. And that came from what you said about him connecting with players and understanding them and understanding what motivated them. I love the fact that all the players said that Steve Wilkes always kept it real with them. Sam Darnold said that. Mm-hmm. And I think he responded because, I think they had been used to being BS'd about how good they were, or, what was expected of them. And Steve Wilkes said, I expect you to be a star. Brian Burns, I expect for you to be Brian Burns. I expect for Derek Brown to be Derek Brown, and so on and so forth. And I think we saw what it looks like when a coach holds players accountable to their talent. And so I can't say that Ben Johnson doesn't know how to do that because I don't know him. No, neither do I know Mike McDonald. But I can reason with what you're saying and say, you know what, they probably can do that because they have maximized all of the guys that they've coached, to get the most out of them, especially somebody like St. Brown for Detroit.
Yeah.
Well, and look at the culture too in Detroit. I mean, that team, we're talking 0-16.
I
Detroit,
know.
terrible for years. And Dan Campbell, like, he was part of the Dan Campbell rebuild of that whole
Right.
team. So that's
Yeah,
why.
Instead of taking money and prestige for a head coaching job, he went back to finish that job because of the strength of that culture and the way that he connected with that team. And I love that, man. Like, that really does feel good for him.
Yeah,
and you want to talk about a culture builder. Dan Campbell's like top 5 in the league of building a culture. Yeah.
He's definitely, but Campbell had been around a lot of good culture too.
That's right.
And he's been around a lot of good culture coaches.
Yep.
For what you think about Sean Payton as an op to Sean Payton, the guys who played for Sean Payton believes he's a culture setter.
Yeah.
And
Frank Smith coached under Sean Payton too.
Who was that? Frank Smith.
Frank Smith. Under Sean Payton.
And that's what you hear. You remember? I talked about Frank Smith a few weeks.
Yep.
But Frank Smith is a guy who is like that. The only concern I got about like a guy like Frank Smith, and not to get too far off the rails, but I think Frank Smith, I think he's all the things that we said he is, and I think he could be great, as a coach. But he's an offensive coordinator who, although he's well liked, and I think he's a very genuine guy, it's kind of like how you felt about Jim Harbaugh, Ricky, on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know what Frank Smith builds around him.
Right.
I don't know what his Rolodex looks like.
Right.
And that's what concerns me, but it's not to say he can't do the job. I just can't piece together what it may look like around him. And that's my only reservation. But culture is important. And like you said, it starts with the players. My only concern with the current roster is that we don't have enough guys who understand winning, especially with a guy like Shaq, who may be done here.
Right.
And the veterans, like your older guys like Dante, has only experienced one winning season here. Like we have to get in guys via the draft, via free agency, who come from some of these winning cultures too. So when the culture guy comes in and starts trying to identify guys, he can identify guys that have won and that could relay what winning is about and how, what the practice habits need to look like, what playing with injuries needs to, be like, what's the expectation and accountability to one another as men. I think Carolina has gotten so dysfunctional as an organization to where even the players, ones coming up on contract years, I think they all have started to get this culture of, I got to make a personal business decision because I don't know where I'm going to be next year because of how bad we are. And I'm not saying that Brian Burns is doing that right now, but some of the comments he made, like honestly, you could watch Brian Burns play during the season after the elbow injury, the stuff that came up. And like Brian Burns would be running, doing this pass rush thing, but he wasn't doing any secondary moves and stuff like that. And you're like, okay, like, are you giving 100? But, you don't know if you're seeing that or not. And I'm not trying to say that he was halving it.
Right.
But I know it's a difference between a player that's going 110% and a player that's going 80%.
Yeah.
And sometimes that shows up on film.
And you're right. You can't add winning into these guys because it's already like the games have already been played, right? These guys didn't win previously in their career, so you can't add that into the mix. But what you can add right now is self-belief. And I think that that's a huge part in establishing that culture as well, even for some of these guys that have promise and talent but have never won. You got to have somebody that can teach them a work ethic and then self-belief. These guys have to know that with the work ethic, it can pay off because you're so good that you can win. You're not a loser. Like you can win, but you got to work your ass off to get there. And what I like about Ben Johnson and Mike McDonald is that they have been revered for the fact that they are detail-oriented and they're not going to just pat you on the ass because you did an okay job. They're going to demand greatness out of the players.
And they've been through it too. Like look at Ben Johnson.
That's right.
I mean, players they like that when a coach can relate to them. That's been they talk about it all the damn time. So for Ben Johnson to build up this Detroit team, I mean that's a massive selling point. If they can bring him in,
I just think it's crazy, man. Think about it, like. The world and the landscape of the NFL has shifted so much to where, like, the Panthers are like looking to the Lions to like pull.
Right. yeah.
It's like
that's nuts.
It's crazy. It's crazy to think about. But the last thing about Ben Johnson, the best thing I've seen about Ben Johnson or read about Ben Johnson is St. Brown was talking about, I guess they had this thing where like all the coaches would come in and kind of like give an outline of the plan or the play designs or concepts or something like that. And how St. Brown, I guess he went over to like the other guys or some other, the level of detail that he goes through to explain, who's responsible for what and whatever. Like he's doing it at a different level than everybody else who's getting up there.
Yep.
And it was like the first sign. I think this happened like last year sometime, but it was like the first indication that like they had a real dude in that OC role. And players, they noticed that, like if you get up there and you're trying to explain concepts, but you're not explaining it, in a way that they feel it should be explained. These guys know more than you think they know. Or at least one or two of them know how it should go. Yep. And if you can't articulate that to a level that they respect, they kind of check out because they don't believe in the person that's telling them the plan. But when you got a guy like Ben Johnson that's telling you the details and like how your route should be executed, what depth you should get, what foot you should cut on, like that's the stuff that makes Ben Johnson special. And I think that's the same thing that makes guys like Shanahan and McDaniel and these other guys.
And the craziest,
it would be beautiful.
Yeah, sorry.
Both. Go ahead. I was just gonna say it'd be beautiful to get a culture guy who's also that guy,
right?
Because Carolina needs all of it.
And Curtis, I'm going to shut up after this, and you can get back on with scheduled programming. I swear, man. I promise you. If I don't, I'll Venmo you $10.
I'm sorry.
But so, and this is the last thing because it's the comparison again with Mike McDonald to Ben Johnson, and how similar they are, despite being on polar opposite sides of football, right? Marlon Humphrey was quoted by saying, talking about Mike McDonald in the way that he teaches, says he's doing a unique job. I've kind of never experienced it. When referring to McDonald's approach of teaching the whole philosophy of coverage, as he's calling, opposed to individual responsibilities. Installed vocabulary, so when defenders hear certain family of words, they know what coverage the defense is executing. What is the whole idea of this call? He's done a really good job of kind of really helping us all be smarter to know where I know what the D-line is doing. I also know what the linebacker is doing. I also know what the safety is doing. Because the reason why I call this defense is because of this. And for Marlon Humphrey, who has been coached by some really revered, esteemed coaches, right? Coming from Alabama and then playing in Baltimore, he's played for some really strong NFL and football minds. And for him to say that it was a unique experience for him, that he's never had a guy who was able to break down all of these things and have this complete understanding and awareness on the players on this defense, that's very appealing to me, man. And I think that McDonald and Johnson, with that mindset, would require their coordinators that they would be paired with to have that same similar approach of, we're not just going to have guys playing a system. We want guys to understand the function of why we're calling the concepts of why we're calling them.
And then just to add to that, and I know you're trying to.
Yeah, I'm going to cut you off. Hold on here. We haven't heard from Kevin in a bit. Okay. Kevin, are you still alive? I'm not sure if he's there.
Yeah, I'm still here.
All right, I want to end on this, and then we can talk outside of here if you want. Do you have faith that David Tepper will get this right? And that's what we're going to end on. Go ahead, Kevin.
Usually I'm the optimistic guy, but I've learned with this franchise to go off of patterns. And, just point blank, put it out, no, I do not feel optimistic. And I've been one of his biggest supporters since he's been here. Been in many Twitter long drawn out debates about him and things like that. But, his constant wanting to have a say in certain decisions and him being at practices with his wife and all this other stuff, I just think they're just doing too much. Like, I admire your passion, but again, you're treating this NFL franchise like your hedge fund, company is just fucking us all up. I'm sorry, messing us all up. And I just think that he's he feel like he wants to be the reason it turns around. That's why he keeps want to make sure we know his fingerprints are around. So no, I don't feel confident.
Ricky, what about you?
No, I don't feel confident. I think that it's possible, but no, I don't feel confident about it because I would be a fool to feel confident that something completely different than what has already been proven to happen over and over is expected to happen. I am optimistic because I'm a fan and I just want my franchise to be not just respectable, man, but I want us to win. Like I want to celebrate with friends and fans. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to have to do these moral victories anymore. I don't want to have to watch a game and dissect and say, well, there was 4 things that I feel pretty good about. So at least I can walk away from that game, right? And not completely hate everything. I think that the outside consulting firm is a good step. I saw somebody mention it, and JJ, it might have even been you, man. Somebody mentioned it on Twitter, and they were like, "It's awesome that he hired him. He's got to listen to him. Like, if he doesn't listen to him, then it don't really do a whole lot of good. They can point you to the river, they can teach you how to fish, but at some point, you still got to put in the work and do it, right? So I hope he gets it right, man. Confident would be a really strong word, though.
JJ, what about you? What can he do to restore your faith in this team? Or are you just completely he's already done the damage. The damage is already done for you.
I mean,
you're over him.
Winning cures all. And so the only thing that he can do right now is, make one of the several good choices he can make. The key thing that Dave Tepper needs to do right now is something we spoke on in the earlier question, is to create alignment. And if he can create like an alignment that the average fan can like easily identify and trust in, then I think the more that we see the fruit of that alignment, the less we talk about Dave Tepper. So to me, creating the infrastructure in terms of the people that he hire within the next month or so, I think the attention on them and less focus on him and his involvement is all that he can do to, I won't even say regain my trust because I have none, but just to kind of make me forget about him. I don't want to think about my own. I never thought about Jed York, like I never thought about who owned the team growing up. I just wanted to watch good football. So I think Carolina just needs to get back to the things that matter, the players first, the coaches. You shouldn't even be thinking about the GM as much as we do. So once you have that alignment, the less we can even talk about Dave Tepper. I want to stop talking about Dave Tepper.
Well, let's leave it at that. I just want to thank you guys all for coming on. It took 2 hours and 15 minutes of your time. Ricky Raines, appreciate you. You guys can check out his podcast, Kitty Lit Podcast. He also writes your Cat Gray blog. Kevin Avery, you guys know him from the 4-Man Rush. Go check them out and their accounts on X and online on Facebook. And, of course, JJ, you guys know him as Panthers Culture online. I believe you're still doing radio hits now on Thursdays or something like that during the season, so check him out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just want to thank you guys because I know this was a long episode. I figured it was going to be one, and we'll probably talk a half hour after this offline, I'm sure. But just want to thank you guys all again.
Thanks for having me on, Curtis. I appreciate getting to talk with the rest of you guys too, man. Great insight.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Always a pleasure to be on with the crew.
All right, that's going to do it for the Panthers on Tap podcast. You can catch our episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Go give us a follow on Twitter at Panthers on Tap for all your analysis and breaking news. And as always,